Last week, I had such a powerful conversation with Diana Davis about the topic of authenticity. And she said something that really stood out to me, which is often we are told to speak from the scar, not from the wound, meaning talk about the struggle when you're on the other side of it, not while you're in the midst of it, because it can be ugly and, doesn't necessarily show the best sides of ourselves. But what Diana said is sometimes you need to do just the opposite. Sometimes we have the most powerful insights and conversations when we speak from the wound instead of from the scar. And that really hit home because that's been my approach forever, not through any strategic approach or anything like that, but just that's how I naturally operate. And so today I wanted to talk about how you can really find your message, find your voice when you're in the midst of a really difficult time. This is something I get asked about a lot, so I thought it was a really powerful topic to dive into today. Let's get into it. Hey, beautiful human. You're listening to Bold Women in Business, the show where strategy meets soul in marketing, branding, and business growth. I'm your host, Rachel Honeyman, messaging and branding strategist, content queen, and compulsive meaning maker. Every week, I'll help you ditch the cookie cutter playbook and build a brand that actually sounds like you, sells like hell, and feels so damn good to show up for. Let's get bold. I've talked about a lot of struggles in a lot of different arenas of my life. So why do I get asked about this all the time? People ask me all the time, Rachel, how do you speak so authentically about your experience? And this comes up in basically every facet of my life. In business, I often speak from the place of going through struggles and really having a hard time in business. And I talk about those struggles while I'm in them and obviously afterwards, right? Once I'm on the other side of them or have worked through them to some extent, I'll reflect on them. But I often share those struggles while I'm in them. But that goes way beyond business. So the best example that I have is my infertility journey. So high level, for anyone who is not familiar with my story as of yet, although I've talked about it a lot. So my apologies if I'm repeating things you've already heard. My husband and I went through about 5 years of infertility struggles where we went through 4 rounds of IVF. There were multiple surgeries involved. I had a miscarriage with my 3rd round of IVF. We had 1 additional round with donor eggs. And without getting into all the nitty gritty, because I've gone into the nitty gritty on other podcasts and in other forums, we had a combination of male factor infertility and female factor infertility. And ultimately, it became very clear that parenthood was just not in the cards for us. And we made the very, very difficult decision to stop pursuing that path altogether, not even other paths, right? So adoption or embryo donation or other potential paths, we decided we were not going to pursue those. I talked about this in, I believe it was the Make It or Break It episode, where I went into a little bit more detail about the raw emotion of that experience and kind of why we made that decision. But that was the decision that we made. And it has now been 3.5 years since we made that decision. But here's why this chapter of my life is so relevant to this conversation. I published, I don't even know how many articles, 5, 6, maybe more, along our journey. So we started this journey in, I believe it was 2018. Time is a blur. But initially, I did not talk publicly about our experience, partially because it was just very fresh, very new, and I didn't totally know what to expect. I kind of naively thought, oh, we'll go through 1 round of IVF and it'll be one and done, but obviously was not the case. And in, I believe it was April 2020 is when I published my first article about our experience. And we were very much in the thick of it. This was something that was very raw and very real. And it was COVID. And so I wrote an article about the experience of navigating infertility during COVID, which had so many layers to it. And I made the decision to quote unquote come out with our story at that time. And it was very raw. And I remember writing the piece. I think it took me maybe an hour to write the piece that I wound up publishing because it just poured out of me. Now, I know I have this podcast. I do a lot of video content, and video and audio content is really fun for me. That's why I do so much of it on my marketing side. But At my core, I'm a writer, and that's really how I express myself. And so when I'm really facing something very raw and vulnerable and real, my expression comes through my words on paper. And so at that time, when I made the decision that I was going to come out about our story and really share it publicly, it just poured out of me. And every setback we had along the way, I wrote another piece, sometimes more than one piece, but I wrote about our experience while we were going through it. The day after I had my miscarriage, I mean, I was a wreck, but all I wanted to do was just sit down and write about what I was experiencing and what I had gone through. And it wound up turning into this piece that I was able to publish, but I didn't necessarily have that intention. Initially, when I sat down to write that piece, it was, I need to get this experience out on paper. And even if it's just for me, but once it was written and I felt like this could help people, I shared it publicly. Now, this is so related to actually our last 2 weeks of the podcast. So last week, I talked to Diana Davis about authenticity and the idea of sharing ourselves in this incredibly real, raw way that is not performative, right? It's not, I'm sharing this in order to get a certain reaction. I'm sharing this because it needs to be shared, right? This is what I am going through. This is a real thing that I'm going through, and I need to share it. The episode before that was with Jonathan Corrales, and we talked about generosity. And for me, authenticity and generosity are inextricably linked because to me, when you show up authentically and you say, I'm sharing a piece of myself while I'm going through it, it is an act of generosity and sharing of ourselves. Now, again, there's a way to do it that feels performative, and there's a way to do it that feels very real. And I think that ultimately comes from within. When you are feeling something very raw and real, and you allow it to kind of pour out of you, whether that's through writing, by just journaling and writing something for yourself, or sharing something more publicly, publishing an article or a blog post or whatever, or if that's in video format or audio format, however you connect with that process and that experience, when you are able to share that with the world in order to help others, that is an act of generosity. So when people have asked me, how did you decide to share your story so publicly and why? The answer is always, well, I always have that moment of, do I hit publish, right? It's a terrifying moment to put myself out there like that. And I never know how people are going to react. To date, I've never had a bad reaction though. And what winds up happening is I have gotten dozens and dozens of messages flooding in from people saying, thank you for sharing this. I feel so much less alone. That is why I do it. I don't do it for my own self-aggrandizement. Is that how you pronounce that word? I don't know. But I don't do it for that purpose. I do it because I know that there are so many people suffering in silence and feeling so alone in their struggle. And by me sharing this piece of my story, it helps them feel less alone. Even if they don't have my exact experience, it makes them feel like someone understands what they're going through. And so that's obviously my, fertility journey. That's a specific area of my life. But this really applies to everything. When I share that my business is causing me so much stress and I'm having just a moment of doubt and uncertainty and not knowing where things are going to go, that is also something that people need to see because we are inundated with these messages of shiny, perfect, happy everything, right? We see celebrities who are, everything looks perfect. And we see influencers, everything looks perfect. And we get this very false message on social media that everything should be perfect. And we can only share from a place of everything being okay. And I think that idea of sharing from the scar instead of the wound really comes from that idea that yes, part of it is, well, when we're in the wound, we can't fully understand what's going on, right? There's so much that we get from being on the other side of the wound and being on the side of the scar, right? We get a lot of perspective. We get a lot of the lessons from it. The lessons don't happen in the wound. The lessons happen from the scar. That is absolutely true. But the idea that we shouldn't share from the wound, I think, is perpetuating that idea that we should only share when things are good. And that's just not real. Life isn't always good. I have been through a lot in the last, 10, 12, 15 years, right? And beyond. We all have our shit. So there's a lot that is there, and you've gone through your own fair share of things. It doesn't matter what they are. We all have struggles because life is struggle. Life is hard, and life can be really, really good and hard at the same time. And I hope that is the case because life just isn't easy. There's a difference though between having raw and like kind of re-traumatizing sharing versus raw and real sharing. And I think the difference really comes down to knowing whether you're sharing for your own healing, whether you're sharing to help others. And it's okay to share for your own healing if it's done in the right way. Quick pause. Can we talk about content for a second? If you're staring at a blank screen more often than you're hitting post, it might be because you're trying to create content that doesn't fit your actual strengths. It's kind of like wearing someone else's jeans. They may look super good on your friend, but you put them on and they are not comfortable and they just aren't doing your butt any favors. That's why I created the Content Marketing Power Type quiz. It's free and it helps you figure out the kind of content you were made to create. The kind of content that feels natural, sustainable, and actually connects with your people in a way that lights you up. In just 45 seconds, or maybe even 30 if you're quick about it, you're going to find out your power type and get custom recommendations to make content feel easier and more effective. Head on over to honeybeebold.com/quiz. That's HONEYBEBOLD.com/quiz. Take it and then DM me your result because I kind of need to know. All right, let's dive back into the episode. I think we've all seen those posts from people that it almost sounds like a cry for help. And sometimes that is very, very necessary, right? If people are posting something and they just need support, that's okay. We should all be reaching out for support. Hopefully, though, you're not just sharing to your broader network saying, I need support, right? And instead reaching out to the people that are closest to you, because an anonymous stranger on the internet is not going to be able to provide the support that you need, most likely. The people who are closest to you will be able to do that. I think it's okay to share from a place of healing yourself, but I do think that there needs to be an element there of doing that while helping others. If there is no kind of benefit to other people, I think there's a risk of it veering into oversharing or re-traumatizing. But I want to come back to this idea that lessons don't happen in the wound, right? Lessons just don't happen in the wound because we can't see the lessons yet. And so when I've shared my raw experiences, sometimes there's an element of teaching, but usually it's more about connection. I will look back on experiences and find the lessons in them. Sometimes I don't see the lessons in them. That's okay. Sometimes we can just have shitty experiences that don't necessarily have a lesson to learn from them. I'm a big believer in that. I don't think that we need to learn something from everything. Some things just suck. But when I'm able to, I will look back and find lessons in an experience that I've had and share from that perspective. But when I'm sharing from a place of raw emotion and a raw experience, I'm really sharing because I want to connect with my audience. I want people to see that what I'm going through, first of all, doesn't define me, right? There's so many parts of me. This is just an experience that I'm going through. And so whatever they're going through doesn't define them either. And I just want my audience to not feel alone, and I want them to feel seen and heard. And I know that when I share my experiences from that place, I'm able to connect so much more deeply with my audience. But how can you kind of show up while you're mid-mess in a way that it is real and connecting and authentic and practical without veering into that icky area? So one thing to understand is that not everything needs to be content. We have this very, very wrong idea that we need to create content from everything. Not true at all. Some things are sacred and some things need time to breathe. And sometimes you need to process things before you can process them publicly, right? We need to process things privately sometimes before we process them publicly. I have often processed things publicly. I've gone through a lot of things that I have processed publicly. And there are also a lot of things that I've processed privately, or I am still processing privately, that I have never shared, will never share. Just because something is happening right now, it doesn't mean that you have to post about it or you have to share about it. That has to be coming from this place of like, I am sharing this because it's going to A, help me heal, and B, help me connect with my audience, and C, it's going to help them in a very tangible way. Similarly, not every message needs to have a CTA to it. And in fact, when you tie a CTA to everything, it really takes away from the authenticity. That's, I think, what gives that ick factor. I actually saw something the other day. This influencer posted about a house fire that her family had. It was so terrible. They lost everything. She posted, I don't remember if it was a reel or a carousel, but it was either pictures or video of her entire house and all of their possessions, everything gone. Her family survived the fire, which is amazing, but they lost everything. And she's sharing this, and it feels like real and raw and vulnerable. And you're like, where's the link to donate to help them out, right? But instead, she had this very awkward transition from the fire to a product that was sponsoring her, right? There was some company sponsoring her, and it was some product. I don't remember what the product was. I remember that it was very loosely linked to the fire, but it felt so disingenuous. It felt like she was taking this very real, raw story, and instead of using it as a way to connect with her audience and build that deep connection, she's using it as a way to sell a product that is sponsoring her. And I think that that's really the difference, right? When you're sharing from a place of real vulnerability, don't tie a CTA to it. That's not the time to sell. The time to sell is from that place of like, I can look back, I can take perspective, I can learn the lessons, right? When you're looking back on something and speaking from the scar instead of the wound, that's a time that you can have a CTA, right? You can say, I offer this service that can help people through this thing that I understand because I went through it, right? And you're connecting on that deep level and saying, I get the pain that you're going through because I went through it myself. And here's a way that I can help you through that. But when you're in the wound and you're going through this really difficult period, to then say, and by the way, I'm selling this product or I'm selling this service, feels super disingenuous, and it feels really disconnected from the potential authenticity there. So if you are in the mess right now, whatever it is, right? You have something going on in your personal life, you're having a lot of struggles in your business, you are having a hard time finding your voice, you're really scared to say the thing out loud, you are scared to show up as your true self. Maybe you're scared that you think everything that you share has to be useful, quote unquote useful. And so you don't want to share something that feels overly personal. I'm here to tell you that you can speak without teaching. It is totally fine. And you can share things without solving problems. Your truth, even when you're in the middle of the mess, is enough to connect with your audience. There is power in an unfinished sentence sometimes, and you do not have to wait until your story is over to start telling it. You also don't have to tell your story while you're in the messy middle if that feels inauthentic to you, right? Like Diana and I talked about last week, it has to feel authentic to you. But if you're in the messy middle and there's an opportunity to work through it publicly in a way that feels safe to you, no one is telling you, I am not telling you to share something that you don't feel comfortable sharing. Don't share, personal secrets that you're not ready to share with the people closest to you, obviously. If you feel safe to share something publicly while you're going through it, and there's an opportunity to do that in a way that helps your audience, not in a useful sense, but in a connecting sense, it is so, so worth it. And this is really what comes down to the idea of messaging that converts with heart, right? It's not about performative vulnerability. It's about telling the truth in a very real and raw way, especially the parts that matter the most to the people that you are serving and that you want to serve. I'm going to tell you very vulnerably here, something that I struggle with a lot is that I sometimes have that voice in my head when I'm sharing something very vulnerably. I have this voice in my head that tells me, you're just sharing this because you're going to get attention or people are going to send you, nice messages. And I have to tell myself back. I have to have this inner conversation, this inner dialogue that is pushing back against that and saying, I know the difference. Right? I know that there's a big difference between, yes, of course, the nice messages feel nice. That's okay. It's okay to feel nice, right? But what's much deeper than that is that I know that by sharing from a very vulnerable place in the way that I do, it's not really about me. Maybe I'll link to some of the pieces that I've written in the show notes about my fertility journey, just as an example. But when I write about this, I'm really not writing it about me. It's about the experience and the way that I can connect with the person on the other side of the screen. And so I have to have this inner dialogue sometimes where I'm like, there's a part of me that worries that I am maybe crossing a line sometimes. And there's a much bigger part of me that knows that that's just not true. And again, there are things that I have never shared publicly and will never share publicly. And the reason that I'm not sharing those publicly is because it is crossing that line, or it would be crossing that line. Or it's just something that I'm not comfortable sharing. That's okay. It's okay for me to have things that I just don't want to share and I can keep to myself. But by being open, I have had the opportunity to build deep connection and trust and opportunity with my audience, not despite the mess, but because of it. Because so many people come to me and they say, I want to work with you because you are so human, because I relate to your story so much, or I resonate with the things that you say so much. And I think I said this in the episode with Diana last week, but if you never give your audience the opportunity to connect with you on that level, you are missing out on so much. So much. So wherever you are in your mess, whether you're deep in the mess and you are drowning in the mess, or you are coming up for air, or you're on the other side of it, just remember that sharing from a place of vulnerability, sharing from the wound, not just from the scar, can be so powerful. And I'm here to cheer you on and help you understand how to skirt that line. So if you're struggling with that, please feel free to reach out. I would love to chat. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you next week. All right, beautiful human. That's a wrap on this episode of Bold Women in Business. This episode was brought to you by my company, Honey Be Bold, with music by Shmukulele. But before you go, don't forget to take the Content Marketing Power Type quiz at honeybebold.com/quiz, because when your content fits your power type, showing up gets way easier and your marketing actually starts working for you. Until next time, stay bold, stay kind, and keep doing it your way.